It's been a big hurricane. She was raped at 12 and never lost the pain, but she gained the hate for kids that call themselves players. She makes them fall in love, turns into a heart slayer. She says a prayer every night before she goes to bed, begs the Lord for strength. She doesn't want to lose her head. Her past haunts her and made a change. Her brother looks at her like my sister be strange. It's mad hard keeping the relationship, her heart shipwrecked. She ain't got faith in shit, she feels alone. That's why she always walks out. No one understood her, and that's why they always bugged out. She never had a real man to truly love her. Her daddy wasn't shit, he went undercover, so she put on a mask and built a big wall. You try to break it down, but it just won't fall. You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on, life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on. You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on, life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on.
I was just a kid, the sadness I felt, broken heart over the hand that I was dealt. Felt ashamed, alone and afraid, thinking about the past and the inflicted pain. If not my father walking away, it was the brother who stole my innocence that day. It got harder to sleep at night, struggling to wake up another day, another fight. But I gotta let go, gotta forgive and forget, gotta live for right now to not live in regret. I'ma love myself, I'ma love life. I wanna go far, gonna pack light. Gonna go far, following my heart. Gotta move on for that brand new start. So I'm moving on, baby. Yeah.
You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on, life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on. You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on, life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on. Life's on hold, move on, baby. You gotta move on, baby. That story's getting old. Move on, baby. You gotta move on, baby. That man will never change. Move on, baby. You gotta move on, baby. Move on, yeah, yeah, yeah. You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on. Life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on. You gotta move on, baby. You gotta move on, life's a blessing. You gotta move on, live in the present. You gotta move on, move on, move on.
Life's a blessing. Live in the present.